I wanted to create something that was free to the world, to show that there is a tradition out there that is worth looking at and listening to.
So in terms of a traditional Guernsey or Channel Island sound, how would you describe it? What is that traditional sound?
To me, it would be quite akin to the French stuff.
Okay.
But also, there's a lot of English elements in there as well. And a lot of it is very unique as well. It's very identifiable as, say, maybe French or English. Yeah. But the actual material itself is often, and the tunes, totally unique to the Channel Islands. There's a few songs that were collected that are hardly collected anywhere else in the world.
Okay.
With traditional songs, they spread. Traditions spread like wildfire fire everywhere. Yeah. And you'll get the same song sung in lots of different traditions, and you can just tell that it comes from a different place, although the song is related to the same source, as it were. And that's the case with a lot of the songs from that were collected in the Channel Islands, is that they have their sources, in one place that has a common theme and is sung by lots of different places, but the way it was collected and the way it was sung here is completely different to the way it's sung somewhere else, and that in itself is unique.
And it's even different to the way it would be sung on the French Norman coast.
Some of them, yeah. So some of those songs, say if they were French and they came originally from that sort of Normandy, Breton sort of area, a lot of them went over to Canada. And you'll have a lot of the French, the speaking Canadians who sing versions of it.
Right.
There'll be ones that existed, again, still in Brittany and Normandy, and they'll be slightly different depending on how people sung them. Yeah. And that song, again, might have come to the Channel Islands, and the way that people sing it in the Channel Islands is different to the way that anyone else sings it. So the identifiable thing is about being as true to the source as you can, and trying to not dilute that. Yeah. And that's where the written note is bad at putting that across. Okay. Which is why traditional musicians rely on the oral tradition so heavily. Yeah. Because if something is sung or passed down from one person to another, it either formulates its own way of being done within the area or within a family, or and it doesn't. If you note that down, then those notes will always remain the same. Okay. And it'll never become part of something, part of a tradition, and it just remains in a frozen state, as it were. It doesn't progress, it doesn't live, it's not used. Yeah. So a lot of traditional musicians much prefer to use the recorded medium as a form of source material, or even better, face-to-face.
Yeah, and then it evolves and it develops. With every performance, or does it take longer than that?
Yeah, every performer has their own way of singing, playing, or doing something. Yeah. And it's it's about trying to represent a bit of that faithfully, but whilst also not denying the fact that you're a creative person as well. Yeah. So it's a lovely medium. It's why it's always more akin, I think, to contemporary music than it is, say, like classical, because classical music often, not always, but it's about the written score. Yes. Or and it is about the performance as well, and how the performer performs that, but it's very much based on the written score, and that's a different thing. Yeah. And so you can say that you can get traditional music that is performed like that, that is performed from the written score, almost in a semi-classical way. And that's what people like Vaughan Williams did, and people like that. They took traditional songs, Bartok, loads and loads of classical composers took elements of traditional song, wrote it into classical compositions, and they've become subsumed within that sort of classical world. But it's their interpretation of it, and that's remained the same. That's remained Vaughan Williams's interpretation of traditional music. The first recordings were done over here and were commissioned by one of the dames in Sark in the 20s and 30s.
Oh, right, okay.
So she wanted to collect and kind of preserve some of the things they did. So she invited a crew from the BBC, and you can buy the album of those recorded songs from the Sark Société, which was put together some of the recordings were put together on a CD called Sark Voices. Yeah. And you can actually search for that. I have a feeling it might even be on Spotify.
Okay.
It's certainly out there. I think it's out there digitally.
Well, would that be the first recorded or oldest recorded example of Channel Island traditional music?
You never know. Somebody might have come over earlier and done it, but that's certainly very early. I mean, the 20s, 30s is an early period for recording and
Do
collecting.
We know why she wanted to do it?
I mean, there was a whole thing about developing Sark as a place, and she wanted to do that, promote it, develop it. People were getting really interested in that sort of stuff at that time. The next sort of big collection was done by a guy called Peter Kennedy. Again, he was commissioned by the BBC to do a massive project to basically collect and record traditional artists of the whole of the British Isles.
Okay.
So he worked alongside other recording collectors like Alan Lomax. A lot of people have heard of him. He did American stuff. And Seamus Innes, or was it Heaney? I can't remember. Seamus Innes, I think, who was doing it in Ireland as well. But Peter Kennedy was the one that was doing it within the UK, and he was the first person to come to the Channel Islands and try and find things, and that was in the 50s.
Okay.
And he collected a lot, but he didn't have the knowledge of French repertoire and song. His knowledge was based more in English, British Isles sort of stuff. So he enlisted the help of Musée National des Arts et Tradition Populaire, and there were two ladies who were working for that organisation called Marguerite Pichonnet-Andral and Claudette Marcel Dubois.
Okay.
And they were kind of like authorities on French repertoire. So a conversation ended up going back and forth between Peter Kennedy and them to do with the material that he had collected. And it took a long time.
And the material was collected from all over the islands?
It was collected from all over the islands. A lot from Guernsey. Quite a bit from Sark. A bit in Jersey. The most frustrating thing about his collections, he went to Alderney, and it was just after, as you can imagine, the sort of occupation. And he did collect some stuff from Alderney. He said on his notes that there was scope to come back and collect more, but he never did.
Right, okay.
So what was collected hasn't, as far as I know, I don't think it's been put out there in public. But it sounds like something was collected. All we have is his field notes to say that stuff was collected from there. But what happened is that the people from the MNATP saw that there was more work to be done, more field work to be collected. So they came back in the 70s. So it took like 15 over 15 years for them to come back and actually start to do another collection. And so those are the main three bodies of collections that exist. but there were other small ones that happened as well. Sark seems to have been a place where people collected songs because it kind of remained there for longer. So, early 70s, people were still singing songs from memory that they had been taught from their parents. And were part of that, what people would say is oral tradition. Like I say, if it's written down, you could go to anybody and say, sing this.
Yes.
It's just written down.
But it's that passing it down from the parents to the child.
And recording it. These are the sources. Field work becomes sort of like source material.
And in terms of those traditional songs now, what's the situation across the islands now?
I'd say the majority of these songs, certainly the ones that we sing, a couple of them would be recognisable to some people.
Yeah.
But very few people. And some would be, the majority would be totally unrecognisable. It's not something that has persisted through the years. People haven't passed down these songs to the next generation. So it is like a lost tradition.
And we can't be blaming it on the occupation and evacuation and deportations that happened.
No.
Because as you said, a lot of the recording was happening, I mean, I've got here, so Mr. Kennedy was in the islands in 1957.
Yes,
that's quite more than a decade after the war. And people were still they were still singing these traditional songs then.
And remembering them.
Yeah, so it's something that's happened in recent decades.
In lifetimes, definitely. And people always blame the war on people, the occupation on the death of Genevieve as well.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a big part of it because, we know that people were ridiculed for speaking it. If you're encouraged to speak it, then you're gonna learn it. If it's got gravitas or weight or value or cultural value or intangible cultural value, then people will treasure it. Yeah. But something was happening in Guernsey, I think, from the 50s right up until probably very recently, where these things have just been kind of brushed under the carpet, I think.
It's not been a desire, would you say, to embrace our culture
in everyday life.
Yeah.
Because I think there's been a big movement. There have been movements on the island for people to perform it in things like the Eisteddfod, or to put together groups to perform to, say, like tourists, or to dress up and go for sort of cultural exchanges with other places in Normandy, even, taking what they consider as our culture to there and things like that. But I wouldn't say it's been encouraged to exist in everyday life, or I don't think the importance of it has been stressed in that way. And as a traditional musician who's come from that from cultures where it is part of it, the last thing I would want to do is dress up and perform it. It's always been a part of what I've done or what I want to do, rather than something that I'm forced to do.
Yeah, as if you're doing it entirely by yourself.
No, totally not.
There is obviously the people that are involved in Liu with you, and I'm guessing you've still got contacts in Normandy and Brittany.
And the reason they were chosen is because so Lelore put together this book CD consolidating all of the collections. Yeah. And from that they wanted to realise the material in a band nowadays that's actually working with traditional music. The only person from the islands is me. One is from Watford in London. Okay. And he's the guy who he knows more about the collections, he knows a lot about language. He's made good attempts at learning all dialects, as far as I know, from Sark, Guernsey and Jersey. Yeah. His mum was French and his dad was English, and he first heard Peter Kennedy's recordings on the radio when in the 60s maybe.
And he's been hooked since.
Wow. So he heard them, and he heard something that he felt connected to, being not quite French and not quite English, but somewhere in between. Okay. And he became interested in traditional songs, And he just started to learn the repertoire of the Channel Islands.
C'était un petit couturier, lamdélé. C'était un petit couturier qui était muni d'aiguilles. S'en fut en hôtellerie, lamdélé. S'en fut en hôtellerie pour y boire et y manger. Et dans cette hôtellerie-là, lamdélé.
If something is sung in Genesee or in Gerrier, then it automatically has a cultural stamp on it saying this language comes from here.
Yeah.
But you could be singing a reggae song in Genesee. You've got your culture and your heritage based in the Caribbean, sung in a different language.
Yeah, okay.
So how do you tie the two together? Something to note is that the majority of songs that were collected on the islands were either in French or English, or they had elements of the local dialect, but that would happen by default because a lot of the people singing the songs, their first language would either be Genesee, Searche or Gerrier.
Yeah, so there'll be some words that slip in, and the accent.
Yeah, the accent. Yeah. If not, they might convert a whole song into the language as well.
Yeah.
And sing it all in local song and actually just change it to make it sound, so it's easier for them.
Yeah.
So what's important is that sort of identifiable sound. One of the sad losses, having come from the English tradition myself, is when the collectors came over, they often ignored the songs in English because they weren't sung in dialect or they weren't sung in French.
So why would you have wanted to hear them?
Because the songs that they have collected and the English songs that are recorded and in the sort of repertoire are so unique to the Channel Islands. Like there's one that I sing on the album called Oh Mother Dear, and it's a version of a song that is collected all over the world, and there are versions sung in French and English, lots of songs sung in English. It is unlike any of those versions, and I'm sure there were more. I'm sure people were singing songs in English that were so unique to the Channel Islands, and we probably lost them. But it's the same with French songs as well. I think you could collect memories now. Yeah. There are certain memories that might exist in people's minds about sound, or what was sung, what was done. Yeah. But these people are getting old. It's a bit like collecting the language, Yeah. It's,
if you don't do it, you miss the boat very quickly.
Very quickly.
But in terms of new traditional music then, what is out there?
No, I mean, there's nothing that I would say is, like that. I say.
So is it all in our past? Is it just a case of recording and retaining memories?
It's very hard to define cultural identity. But it's kind of a subject, and it's kind of a thing that you kind of have to broach somehow. Yeah. And I have been asked many times, are elements of other cultures now part of our culture? Absolutely. Yeah. But, you wouldn't say to someone from Latvia, for example, your traditional songs are now part of our tradition. But if you asked somebody from Latvia to sing them a song in their tradition, they could. And that would be the sound that you would hear would define their culture. Okay. So,
and if they are someone from Guernsey, in response,
how is that sound defined? I personally think there are all the elements there to sort of start that, and I think it's happened in other traditions. It's not a quick process. I mean, these people have been doing it since the sort of 60s, 70s, and only, now you could say there's a sort of cultural identity of places like Cornwall, Wales, Northumberland.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of places have cultural identity within sound, but it is something that needs working on. People think it's important, because is it important?
Well, is it important to you? And if so, why is it important, would you say?
I think it's important because I think a lot of people these days feel quite displaced. And I think having a sense of cultural identity can help you feel like you belong somewhere.
Yeah.
And I also feel like there's a lot to be gained by being individual and not homogenous. As human beings, we want to be like that. I think that's why we're rebellious, because we rebel against the, monoculture, and we try to do something that's more interesting. Yeah. And a great way of doing that is to look at traditions. Yeah. It's interesting how, like, when the punk punk came along, one of the sort of scenes that it went hand in hand quite well with was the traditional music scene. Yeah. And you'd get that punk folk crossover quite quickly.
Well, obviously the Pogues.
Shane
MacGowan dying a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, but
that's really what his music was, wasn't it?
Punk and then people like the Levelers, blending sort of songwriting and elements of traditional sort of sound, or Mumford and Son.
Yes.
But you have to have a sense of sound to start with.
And is that a way that the Channel Islands culture, through the sound, could develop by blending with other cultures that are here?
I've seen it happen in Jersey. I know that they're trying to. One of the things they've realised is that by embracing the other cultures that are there, it helps define their own. Yeah. So, for example, within the language, they've held festivals of cultural sharing, as it were. So you'll get the Portuguese community traditional songs and presenting traditional culture of Portugal alongside their Polish community, alongside their Latvian community, and then as part of that they have their Jersey community. And what they find is that the meeting point there is it really helps solidify a bit to do with sort of cultural identity, but also encourage people to be proud of what they do have.
And there is room for all these different cultures, isn't there?
Oh, always. There's a classic line that Etienne, the violin player from Lille, said, and he said, by sharing songs, you enrich your own culture. Music is an amazing sort of bridge to different cultures and communities. And that way, I think it's, if we could do that here on Island, we could basically open the opportunity.
Yeah.
What pains and sorrows brings me home. Bring me a chair for to sit me down, and a pen and ink for to write it down. She went upstairs to make her bed. She laid on it, but not a word said she. Her mother went upstairs for to see, but the door was locked and asleep was she. father returned at home, and asking for his daughter dear, he ran upstairs and the door he broke, but found her hanging by a rope. He took his knife and cut her down, and in her purse these words were found. Oh, foolish girl, oh, foolish am I, for to hang myself for a sailor boy. You'll dig my grave both deep and wide, a marble stone at my head and feet, and in the middle the turtle dove to let the world